Good morning and welcome to the Brexit panel discussion. From a GRC perspective, what have been the impacts? I'm delighted to be joined today on the panel by three extremely distinguished visitors and guests. May I first introduce Dr. Anastasia Lauterbach. Dr. Anastasia is both a professor in AI and also cybercrime, and also works on many boards, advisory. And maybe if I can hand over to Anastasia, a brief introduction from yourself.
Thank you so much. Indeed, I teach AI, data, and a course on cybersecurity at the University of Innsbruck. I've just switched from Potsdam. I serve on corporate boards in the United States, in the UK, and continental Europe. My two current boards are in transportation industry, B2B transportation, and I coach and mentor CXOs in all kind of companies. Most focus is on Fortune 2000 and private equity companies. So that's me.
Thank you very much. I'm also joined by someone who I think needs no introduction, the father of GRC, Mr. Michael Rasmussen. Welcome, Michael. As I say, very difficult to say you've done so much in this industry, but the guru, the pundit, could you maybe just introduce yourself any further that we don't know perhaps?
Um, 2020 research. And my job is research. I spend my time focusing on what are the challenges organizations face in context of governance, risk management, and compliance around the world, and how they go about solving that with strategy, process, and particularly technology.
Thank you, Michael. And we're also joined by the head of operational risk at Sumitomo Mitsubishi Corporate Bank, Mr. Sam Lee. Sam, you've had many roles, RBC, Royal Bank of Scotland, Royal Bank of Canada. Can we have a brief introduction from yourself as well, please, sir?
Sure. I head up operational risk for EMEA, as Charles said. Tours of duty with some of the more interesting global players. Operational risk, yes, that's my area, but I think more recently the new, but it's not new really, is it, area of operational resilience, which I think plays into this particular topic quite nicely. I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much. So, I mean, if we look at Brexit, it's had a huge impact in many, many different ways. We've been recently seeing all the wonderful effects in the UK with the HGV drivers, and we've had issues with pig farms. We've even had issues with runs on the pump and everyone going rather crazy about their supply chain. We're also concerned, obviously, in the arbitrage and legislation. We've had new legislation come out with the EU standard contract clauses. We've had Schrems 2 come up, and everyone looking about how do we deal with ever-changing markets. But maybe if I come to you, Anastasia, you've had a great experience in the airline industry working with EasyJet. Maybe you could share some of your impacts of Brexit and how that's impacted your time.
Well, thank you so much. And clearly, airline industry really went through a huge period of turmoil because first it was about Brexit, and then the COVID actually imploded the performance of this industry. So EasyJet has begun the process of suspending voting rights for non-EU shareholders in order to comply with post-Brexit airline ownership regulation. And this is something which I could not imagine, let's say 10 years ago, that it would come to something like this, to truly manage a process to change voting rights into existing shareholder base. So European rules require carriers that operate in the bloc to be majority owned by investors based within the European Union. And obviously this is exactly what was in the process to get change. It was not a huge gap from what was needed, but still, EasyJet introduced a process to comply with this regulation to take care of it. And that's just on the side of investor relations. Of course, in terms of operations, there were substantial changes, and EasyJet as a company decided to have a very strong European operational base. It's currently in Austria, in Vienna, and obviously everything which was licensing of the employees who are flying, so the pilots, the crew, it had to be done in Europe as well to have this double licensing and to comply once again with the UK regulations and with the European regulations. So obviously it's a huge process, there's a huge program to manage, to be disciplined, to look at, and all needed to be done in parallel of just transporting passengers, exciting them with products and services, and still stay within a certain financial envelope. So you can imagine that the burden operationally in terms of investor relation was quite high. And I know a number of airlines which actually said we are not going to actually carry on with our operations and we will suspend passenger transportation altogether. So one of those is, for example, a cargo transportation company which is based in the Netherlands, but which has Russian money in it, called Volga-Dnepr. They suspended the passenger carrier in the UK due to the impact of Brexit.
Thank you for that. If I can come to you, Sam, on that, a lot of banks certainly were London-based and had to set up satellites in Europe to counter Brexit. Did you have any experience of that yourself?
Yes, I think most banks had to set up some sort of entity that was in the EU, and I think at the risk of equivocating slightly, the impact of Brexit, I think, on the financial services industry, and I'll try and yo-yo between specifics on the financial sector and kind of generic stuff. The answer is yes and no, which sounds a bit schizophrenic, I know. The yes is, as you said, Charles, Brexit's come along, various regulatory requirements have to be adhered to, so it means we can't just go into any country in Europe. That's why people were setting up branches or entities in the Germanys, in the Amsterdam, the Frankfurts, the Amsterdams, etc. And you have to navigate those regs. So that's the yes. The couple of no's are, but hang on a minute, haven't we always had to deal with cross-border issues? So this is another cross-border issue. So what's different? Now, I'm not trying to say that Brexit has not had an impact, but I think most risk managers will and organizations will understand that the world's not static. So on that assumption, along comes something, an external environmental change called Brexit. So you've got to then look at, well, what are my risks? What could happen? What do I need to retool? What do I need to mitigate? So Brexit's no different to any other change in many ways. The other specific yes, perhaps, is also, well, as a result of the issues that Brexit has caused, that's had impacts on supply chain. It's impacted manufacturing. It impacts financial services as well, in terms of movement of people, actually in terms of our third-party suppliers, where there are chains that are impacted by certain regs. So there's another yes. But again, the other no is, but how is that different to any other, whether it's a market-wide event or whether it's a specific explosion of something? I use that term carefully, because that's what risk managers are meant to do. Something's changed. What do we need to proactively analyze and understand about our sector, our business? What are the actions that we need to take to mitigate that? And then I'll leave it at that. I won't go into it unless we want to. There's the demarcation, if you like, between operational risk and preventing bad things from happening or difficulties from arising, and this, again, inverted commas, new, but it's not new concept of resilience, which is, okay, let's pretend that you have been disrupted. Let's pretend that you cannot navigate the regulations, and all of a sudden you can't move people back to the UK, and they happen to be overseas, and you can't do any cross-border marketing. How do you respond to that disruption? Forget your probabilities. How do you then serve your customers? How do you then ensure that you're not adversely impacting the market? We need to have been doing that all the way along. Again, not just for Brexit, but for all sorts of other things. What makes Brexit different, I guess, is the slightly provoking question that I'll ask on that. I'll leave it there for the moment.
Thank you for that. Yeah, coming to Michael, I mean, we're talking there about the broader market, which is something that was part of the operational resilience from the good old PRA in the consultation paper didn't actually come out in the actual directive that was issued afterwards, that they would actually focus on the broader market just yet. But how do you see legislation? We talked about operational resilience across Europe having slightly different nuance. What's your perspective on that, and what we just heard from Sam and Anastasia?
Oh, wow, there's so many layers there. I mean, for one perspective on the Brexit risk landscape between the EU and the UK, the Bank of England and the European Central Bank have been able to coordinate a smooth, financial transition of policy adaptation and are more or less in lockstep, while much of the UK-EU trade cooperation agreement was left mostly unresolved. Of the 1,259 pages, only 6 pages pertain to the financial sector. The UK MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding, was agreed upon. However, the UK is pretty much viewed in the EU no differently than the United States, an offshore financial center, which the majority of EU member banks were already in compliance with the majority of the requirements, and vice versa. So the UK has also agreed to participate with EU programs and requirements. The EU Commission is unlikely to grant segment-specific equivalency status to UK financial institutions, with the exemption of security depositories and clearing services, of which UK institutions hold a market advantage. The EU liquidity pools are stuck in London, and the European Central Bank policy is unfavorable to the point that this is hard to reverse. The EU has a market dependence on London banks, as it does with the United States. The EU wants to reduce the dependence, but does not have a clear path forward, from my perspective, on how other to set financial policy to coax EU financial activity away from London. In the end, the EU not granting London banks equivalency status will result, ultimately probably, in London deregulating to attract more global capital. The EU's equivalence leverage card has an expiration date. Simply put, who cares? The EU is slow in this area and couldn't really organize itself quickly. It's not as agile.
Thanks for that. I think agility is a key thing for us in the GRC's perspective to try and respond and react. What are these strategies? And maybe this is again where AI and tech, maybe we can get Anastasia's view on sort of adapting to the market and these legislative arbitrage opportunities that Michael sort of alluded to.
Look, I loved two things which my both colleagues were talking about. So from the SAM's perspective, this notion of operational resilience and how it plays into the risk management perspective. And then obviously everything around uniqueness or the absence of this uniqueness of Brexit as an event, traumatic event. And then agility of businesses. Doesn't matter whatever industry you take, this agility is key. And obviously, I see much broader implications on what is going on right now. And there's a huge portion of uncertainty how the world will look like, let's say, 5 years from now. And while saying this, I'm particularly focused on what will happen with AI. Obviously, the European Union has just drafted a set of rules, which I personally called the European Gdpr for AI. It was published in May of 2021. And when I look into this, I have more questions than answers. So clearly, for my taste, and there are people who would oppose this and they would applaud it, I think that European Union tried to kind of, stay tremendously ethical in the favor of a regular citizen. And say we are going to really safeguard privacy, we are going to safeguard everything around this individual. And in case technology intrudes and, for example, discriminates whenever we are talking about the credit risk underwriting, or whether we are talking about facial recognition software which might be used somewhere within the European border. So this is something which should not happen in the European Union. So, and actually, so this call to review all products and services implying algorithms which are not quite clear how they work. So it more or less eliminates the whole deep learning in products and services. It eliminates everything which is currently subject of studies for explainable AI, where a lot of money is going into, and which I applaud. And it reduces the capabilities of European small companies in AI to innovate, to get the data, to do something with this. What I am very concerned about is that this kind of, very draconian rules on AI regulation, transparency would hurt competitiveness. And it does not offer anything anything to boost European companies to compete on global markets. For example, there is not one single world that we have wonderful technologies on decentralized data. Decentralized data market powered by protocols like Ocean. It's a European innovation. This company operates from Berlin and from Singapore. And it gives a lot of opportunities for small businesses, for nonprofits, and for large European incumbents to use AI and to actually control the data without going immediately into big tech. So there's not one single word on how to favor such innovation. There's just all about forbidding things, reviewing applications, and then the next question is who is going to review those. I can't see European bureaucrats in Brussels to sit down and to give a good response whenever they see a new application or a new service. And the list of what is forbidden and what is not favored is quite long. And at the same time, we have this nascent Cold War around hot tech going on in between of China and the United States. And obviously, UK has been a very big ally of the United States when it came to tech. And I'm very curious how the country and the companies in the country will position themselves. Will they be more inclined to do to go the US path in terms of semiconductors research, AI, applied AI, quantum computing, stuff like that, or whether, for example, China might go in one or another industry providing very cheap technologies, still good technologies, but obviously with a question mark, how risky are those and what Chinese might want with those technologies in terms of national security, etc. So there are so many questions where the Brexit actually kind of is in a way to single out UK as a legislation, and where we might see certain impact of UK being pushed into this decision necessity. Who are my allies? What path am I choosing? Is it something unique about what I have to do in developing new technologies, especially in AI, especially in quantum computing, and of course in semiconductors, which powers everything? I see the risk of the supply chain. Frankly, I did not think about supply chain risk much in terms of Brexit in the past year, because it was all about COVID. So I don't know how my colleagues would see it and rate it, what was more prevalent. So the disruption coming from Brexit or the disruption which came from COVID. So I clearly would emphasize practically COVID and not Brexit, but I might be wrong here. But once and for all, so this nascent legislation and regulatory regimes around new technologies, data technologies, which power everything nowadays, be it a bank, be it a transportation company, be it an agricultural company. So data is everywhere. How will UK position itself after Brexit? Will it go with the US? Will it go with China? European Union for me here is more or less in a lost position, because they decided to take a path which will not be competitive long term.
Thank you for that. And I think it opens so many more questions, as you say. And looking at this whole third-party risk, geopolitical risk that we've got Macron threatening the power supply into the UK because of the fisheries complaint around Jersey. How do you manage these things, Michael? If I'm a GRC trying to run my operational risk and my supply chain, how do I keep track of the threats that things like the Macron statement, having seen the run on the pump, as I like to call it? How does someone deal with that? Any ideas?
Well, it's an interconnected risk environment. In my presentations, I often talk about, the quote from the physicist Fritjof Capra, when he's talking about biological ecosystems, that the more we study the major problems of our times, the more we come to realize that they are interconnected and interdependent. They cannot be understood in isolation. They are systemic risks. And he might as well have been talking about business risk today. And organizations need to align their risk teams to really have a global perspective on risk. Europe and the United Kingdom, while sharing many of the same compliance risks pre-Brexit, should assess that post-Brexit. There's the adjustment period that requires overall awareness of change and a discovery process on the impacts of the echoing effects of change. Exiting a single market is not a death sentence. The United Kingdom has the advantage of agility and to serve its own interests to its advantage, while the EU requires greater consensus, inevitability resulting in a slower process. Organizations need to enable themselves with the resources to preemptively understand the regulatory divergence over time and move with agility to understand what impact tolerances they have and they're being pushed.
Thank you so much. I think we're almost out of time, but I'd just like to sort of end with Sam. Any reflections that you have on changing legislation, tracking third party, anything you'd like to add before we have to close out?
Well, let me try and draw together what Michael and Anastasia just said. I mean, agree with everything they said, and particularly with Michael, your comments. None of that's new, right? So the idea of breaking out of our silos, whether you cut it up by market risk, operational risk, business risk, credit risk, whatever it is, we need to understand that all risk has to be managed in a cross-functional way. So this interconnected risk piece, that's not news. That's how we should have been doing things. The idea of, well, what if it does go wrong? How would we respond? That's not new. The idea of, okay, here's a new event that's happened, whether it's a Brexit, whether it's global warming, whether it's a flash event of an idiot setting off a bomb or an earthquake, whatever it is, that's not new either. So I think the answer is we still have to have the intelligence to join the dots, do that forward thinking about, well, what if? How would we get out of this mess if? And your earlier question, I think, Charles, is very important about the role of fintech or AI. It has a role, but at the end of the day, it's a toolbox that may allow you to do things slicker, but you still need the intelligence of people to say, okay, but this is not new. It's just another risk that we need to layer on. We need to figure out what the impacts are, what the downstream effects are, what the extreme third and fourth party risks are, and how we manage that, and what's our appetite, what are we comfortable with.
Thank you so much. I think we're out of time. Do you have time for any questions? I'm just going to the team. Bear with me. How should a business evaluate their integrated view of risk post-Brexit? And how should companies improve their risk decision-making and performance with regards to these changes? I think we pretty well answered that earlier, actually. I think that's fairly well covered. I think we agreed. I think when we're looking at this whole area, it's ever changing. We need to be aware of the full GRC. There's the compliance focus, the legislative arbitrage. We need that data component that we spoke about. So we looked at Bryden report in terms of businesses failing, where we need to use technology was the recommendation, because you can't keep up to date and process to keep up to date, to take Anastasia's and that fintech and AI, machine learning. So I think we do need to do more. I really thank everyone on the panel, and I think any closing comments anyone would like to make from the panel.
I maybe give my 2 cents to this. Obviously, technology is really just a tool. And people expect some unbelievable things from machine learning tools. But Pablo Picasso said that machines are very stupid. They just give answers. So it's up to humans and great risk managers to ask great questions and really formulate hypotheses. And then, of course, machines can connect more dots than our human eyes can perceive. But ultimately, it's about a lot of experience and being capable to read history. As already said, nothing of this is tremendously new. What is new, maybe, it's a lot.
Thank you. Anyone else, Michael? Any closing comments?
I'll give a
well
quick
said.
soundbite. I can't really add too much to what Anastasia said, so that was nice and succinct. But we just need to stay switched on, stay agile, connect the dots, and use the tools as tools, but not take out the human intelligence angle.
And Michael?
I would agree with all that, and I would just add that when it comes to understanding this full view of risk and geopolitical risk and things, we leverage our left brain logical structured thinkings about risk and our risk models, but we really also need to balance that out with creative right brain risk thinking, being able to think outside those boxes and models and how things can break, where risk can expose the organization, because it is very complex and models have their limitations. And I think as we look at Brexit and the complexities of geopolitical risk and the downstream effects, that there's a lot of things that we have to intuitively look at risk and think outside the box as well as within our traditional models.
I've got to thank a wonderful panel discussion. That was highly informative. Thank you so much, everyone, for your contribution. And without any more ado, back to the team. Thank you, everyone.